Was Rome built on blood and broken bones? Did a single, brutal winter decide the fate of an empire? And what if the greatest army in the world wasn't conquering but simply waiting to be swallowed? The rain in Tongers, Belgium, in November 54th BC wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a greasy, insistent curtain clinging to the mud and the rough-hewn timbers of a Roman military camp. A camp that smelled of sweat, wood smoke, and a simmering dread. It wasn't a place for heroes, not really. It was a holding pen, a temporary roost for 10 legions, a terrifying, sprawling mass of men huddled against the relentless advance of winter in the wilds of Germania. Julius Caesar, the man who'd carved a path through Gaul, the man who'd stared down Pompey and the Senate, was currently scattered across Italy, leaving his legions to weather the storm in isolated pockets. And this one, commanded by the cautious Sabinus and the stubbornly inflexible Cotta, was about to face a nightmare. Let's be clear, the Romans weren't exactly known for their humility. They swaggered into every new territory, planting their eagles and demanding tribute, but this wasn't a conquest. This was a pause, a logistical nightmare. The Eburones, a tribe of Germanic speakers who considered this muddy valley their own, were supposed to be supplying the troops. They delivered the first loads of food, a grudging acknowledgement of Roman dominance. But then, something shifted. A whisper of rebellion, a spark of defiance ignited by a slippery character named Ambiorix, a Trevuri chieftain who'd clearly had enough of Roman interference. Ambiorix and Caduvolius, the two kings of the Eburones, were playing a dangerous game. They'd initially welcomed the Romans, presenting themselves as loyal allies, promising safe passage to other camps. It was a calculated deception, a masterclass in manipulation. Ambiorix particularly was a viper in a silken robe. He oozed charm, offering assistance while secretly plotting the legion's demise. He spoke of a massive Germanic horde gathering beyond the Rhine, a tide of warriors poised to sweep across Gaul and devour everything in its path. It was a tactic designed to sow fear and discourage Cotta from staying put. Cotta, a man obsessed with order and protocol, wasn't buying it. He'd smelled trouble, a metallic tang in the air, a sense of impending doom. He'd argued with Sabinus, a man more inclined to pragmatism, about the wisdom of remaining in the camp. Sabinus, burdened by the responsibility of his men, wrestled with the decision. He knew the rumors of revolt were credible. The Eburones weren't just grumbling, they were actively undermining the Roman presence, but staying meant risking everything. The decision, as it always did, came down to a gamble. Sabinus, swayed by the urgency of the situation and a nagging sense of unease, agreed to the safe passage. It was a fatal mistake. The legionaries, expecting a relatively straightforward route, marched out in a long, unwieldy column, a target painted on their backs. The woods surrounding the camp weren't dense, they were a trap. Then the world exploded. Arrows rained down from the trees, a stinging, relentless barrage. Spears pierced the ranks and the legionaries caught in the open were overwhelmed. It wasn't a coordinated attack, not at first. It was chaos, a swirling mass of Eburones warriors pouring down from the hills like a vengeful storm. The Romans, trained for battle, for disciplined formations, found themselves utterly disoriented. Their shields, designed to deflect blows, became cumbersome obstacles. Their swords, meant for swift, decisive strikes, were useless against the sheer volume of attackers. Cotta, however, wasn't about to surrender. He barked orders, pulling his men into a square formation, a desperate attempt to create a defensive perimeter. It was a brilliant, instinctive move, but it was also a death sentence. The Romans, trapped in a confined space, became an easy target. The Eburones, understanding the limitations of Roman tactics, avoided a direct confrontation. They simply rained down missiles, a constant, agonizing barrage. Hours bled into each other. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the valley. The Roman casualties mounted. Every man who fell was replaced by another, but the relentless pressure never ceased. Sabinus, witnessing the carnage, desperately tried to parley with Ambiorix, offering terms, begging for mercy. It was a futile gesture. The Eburones weren't interested in negotiation. They wanted blood, then the charge. A wave of warriors surged forward, breaking through the Roman defenses. The square shattered, and the legionaries, realizing the futility of resistance, began to fight with a desperate, almost suicidal fury, but it was a losing battle. The Eburones, fueled by rage and a thirst for revenge, overwhelmed them, and then the final, heartbreaking act. As darkness descended, the Roman survivors, realizing that escape was impossible, made a choice. A choice born of desperation, of a refusal to be captured, of an unwavering loyalty to their comrades. They took their swords and shields, and they ended their lives. One by one, they plunged themselves into the mud, a silent, grim testament to Roman courage and the brutal reality of defeat. The camp, once a symbol of Roman power, was now a charnel house. 7,000 men, a staggering number, lay dead in the valley. The remnants of the legion, a handful of ragged survivors, stumbled back to the camp, their faces streaked with mud and blood, their spirits broken. They committed suicide, a final, defiant act of honor, but the story doesn't end there. It's not just a tale of a single, disastrous defeat. It's a microcosm of the larger problems plaguing the Roman Empire. The legions, once the bedrock of Roman power, were becoming increasingly vulnerable, plagued by internal divisions, by a lack of discipline, and by a growing sense of disillusionment. The constant campaigning, the endless wars, the lack of recognition and reward, it was all taking its toll. The Eburones weren't acting alone. Ambiorix, the Trevuri chieftain, was orchestrating the revolt, providing arms and supplies to the tribes. He wasn't a single warrior, he was a network, a web of discontent, exploiting the vulnerabilities of the Roman system. The empire was cracking from within, weakened by corruption, by political intrigue, and by a growing sense of apathy among its soldiers. Caesar, far away in Italy, would have been furious. He'd expected his legions to be invincible, to crush any opposition with ruthless efficiency. But this wasn't a battle he could simply send reinforcements to win. This was a symptom of a deeper malaise, a warning sign that the empire was teetering on the brink. The story of Tongers isn't just about a single battle. It's about the slow, inexorable decline of an empire. It's about the fragility of power, the dangers of complacency, and the devastating consequences of ignoring the whispers of rebellion. It's a reminder that even the most formidable armies can be undone by a combination of internal weakness and external pressure. And it all began with a rainy November day in a muddy valley in Belgium, a day when a legion of Roman soldiers learned, in the most brutal way possible, that even the greatest empire can fall. Was this simply a tactical blunder, a momentary lapse in judgment? Or was it a harbinger of a greater catastrophe, a sign that the foundations of Rome were already crumbling? Consider the details: the meticulous planning of the Roman camp, the careful construction of the ramparts, the reliance on local tribes for supplies. All of these factors contributed to the disaster. The Romans had created a trap and they had fallen into it. And what about the Eburones? Were they simply a band of rebellious tribesmen, driven by a desire for revenge? Or were they part of a larger movement, a coalition of tribes united against Roman domination? The answer, as is often the case with history, is complex and multifaceted. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and ultimately of the enduring human desire for freedom. Think about the men who died at Tongers. They weren't just soldiers, they were fathers, sons, husbands, and brothers. They had left their homes and families to serve the empire, believing in its ideals, in its power, in its destiny. And they died not in glorious battle, but in a senseless, brutal massacre. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood and the mud, but not the memory of that fateful day. The camp at Tongers remained a silent testament to the fragility of power, a stark reminder that even the mightiest empires can be brought to their knees by the simple, devastating force of human will.